Okay, in this video, I'll be replacing the output jack on my 1977 Gibson guitar. I'll do a quick demo of why I'm replacing it, and this is probably a vintage 77 output jack as well. So basically, if you move the cable around, it makes sort of a buzzing noise or a crackling noise, which is obviously not what you want. Like I said, it's a 1977 Gibson. Very similar setup to what you'd see on a Gibson SG. And it's an RD standard, which I got from a pawn shop for about 250 bucks, but that was about 20 years ago. It's got two humbucker pickups on it. Those were actually replaced, and those are Gibson 57s. And then it has two tones and two volume controls. So the first thing I'm going to do is just remove the nut and washer off the existing output jack. And they come off very easy. If they're super tight, maybe you'll need a wrench or something like that to get it moving, but once it starts moving, it should come off no problem. I got some guitar strings for Christmas, so I'll restring that off camera. I also have some deoxit here, so I've already done a video on cleaning the pots. I'm going to do that while I'm doing this, but that's not going to be in this video. And this is the output jack I got. They're very inexpensive. I think this one was about $6 Canadian. It is different than the one that's in there, but that's fine. I've got a small soldering iron. It's just a 25 watt. It's already plugged in and warming up. Got a little screwdriver set, generally for eyeglasses, and I'm using this type of solder. It's a 60-40, so that's a 60 tin, 40 lead, and it has a rosin core, so I'm not using any additional flux. I do have another solder, but this 60-40 has a bit of a lower melting temperature, and I found it easier to work with as opposed to this old roll I've got, which is a silver solder. Also rosin core as well, but I'm not going to use that one. I found the one I picked up works pretty well. So to access this thing, and just like most guitars, there's going to be some sort of cover either on the back, in the case of like a Gibson style like this, or it could be that you have to take off the entire front like a Fender style. But very straightforward. There's going to be a bunch of screws and there's going to be a plastic cover, assuming that you still have it on. And then you can see I can pull the output jack straight back, and that's because I've already taken off that nut. On the new output jack, there's only two terminals to be concerned with. There's this one that I'm touching now, and that is the grounding or sleeve terminal. And there's this terminal over here, which is actually connected to the tip, called the tip terminal. And that's going to connect to the tip arm. So the tip arm is going to be what's called the hot wire, and the sleeve one, that one right there, is going to be your grounding wire. So tip and grounding, and that's pretty much that. And those two terminals are separated by some sort of non-conductive material. Now, the easiest way to figure out which wire is which on your guitar is really just to look at how the old one was wired up, assuming it was working well, and assuming it was wired correctly, of course. In my case, the brown wire is connected to the tip, so it is the hot wire in this configuration, and this yellow wire, which is basically holding up the sleeve, is obviously attached to the sleeve and is the grounding wire. The other way you can tell is the grounding wire is generally connected to all the metal things in the guitar, and that is also a good indication that's your grounding wire if you somehow feel that it was wired backwards initially. To remove the wires, I just touch the old solder with my hot soldering iron, and that'll loosen up the solder and you can pull the wires back without cutting them or breaking them. I have very little wire to work with here, so I really can't cut or break the wire. If I do, I'll have to go obviously buy some new wire and do significantly more rewiring. The grounding wire was a little bit more difficult to get off, but I just had to sort of pinch the solder down a little bit and then remove it, and that's because they ran the wire right through the sleeve of the output jack. So I'm actually going to do the same thing, so you can see me pass the wire through the sleeve terminal on the output jack, and then I'm going to reconnect it to where it was on the pickup selector switch. So obviously your guitar configuration is going to sort of depend on what it looks like, but really if you could resolder everything back the way it was, you should be pretty good to go. I found this was not a very difficult process at all. So I'm just going to tack it into place with the soldering iron and the existing solder, and then I'll take the new solder and sort of heat up the work and then flow the solder onto the location that I want the wire. So pretty easy to do the soldering. Obviously you want the piece that you're going to solder down nice and hot. You don't want to just drop hot solder onto the cold metal, and that'll ensure that the solder sticks well. Now one thing I did here is actually make sure that the output jack will fit, and I sort of got it into the correct location. And that's because the wires are so tight and I don't have much space to work. If the wires were a little bit looser, obviously I could put it in place later, but like I said, the wires are really tight. So I'm going to drop the output jack into place and even screw it down, first putting the washer on and then putting the nut on it. And that'll ensure that the wires are in the correct location, because obviously if I solder them in one location, it may make it difficult to move afterwards. If you have lots of wire in your guitar and you have a little bit of slack, it's not going to be an issue for you, most likely, but in this case, with really tight wiring, it would be an issue. So at this point, the grounding wire is only soldered back onto my pickup selector switch. Now I'm going to have to solder it onto the output jack. In this case, you can see the grounding wire goes through the sleeve connector and then makes a hard left turn to get to the output jack. So in this case, I'm not going to worry about crimping it around the sleeve terminal because it's already got a good mechanical connection. So I'm just going to leave it like that, and then I'm going to secure it with solder. So that's all there is to it. Just like before, get the metal that you're soldering fairly hot, then flow the solder onto it, and it will hold it in place. And then for the hot terminal or the tip terminal, you can see that I'm bending it into place. So I've passed the wire through the circular cutout on the tip terminal and then bent the wire around the terminal as well. So even without the solder, it has a bit of a connection, and then I'm going to flow the solder onto it. Again, touching the working surface of the tip and then flowing the solder into it. So now that wire has a mechanical connection because it was passed through the terminal lug and then bent around, and now it's got the solder to make a good electrical connection there. I'm not sure about the other solder that was done on the volume and tone controls. That might have been done when I purchased the Gibson 57 pickups I put in this thing, and I got a guitar store to do that. So I'm not sure if the soldering mess was from the Gibson factory or if it was from the guitar store that installed the pickups 15 years ago, but I might re-examine how that was done later. So I've used the deoxit, sprayed it into all of the pots, gave all the pots a quick turn back and forth. So before I put the back cover on the guitar, I am going to test it and make sure everything works, just to save me some time if it doesn't work. And I'll move the guitar cable back and forth and make sure there's no crackling noise. And I did find that this guitar output jack holds the cable much more firmly than the old one, and there's absolutely no noise. And if you're interested, there's the RD standard wiring diagram. I don't think I've seen that before, but it does have a wiring diagram on the back of the electronics cover. Then to put everything back in place, pretty easy. Obviously just going to take all the little screws that I took out initially and run them back down through the black plastic cover that protects all the electronics. It should be noted that this is for passive pickups only. If you have an active system, it is a little bit different, and the output jack has most likely 2 grounding terminals on it. And then obviously once I've got everything put back together, give it a little test to make sure it works, and it's working pretty well. Overall, I found this job was pretty easy. I did pull out a few extra things like some side cutters, and I got a box cutter so that I can trim back some of the wire. But overall, I found the job pretty fast and easy. And as long as you can do some very basic soldering, you should be able to pull this off no problem. Anyway, thanks for watching my video. Don't forget to like and subscribe.